Well, I think, as somebody that's been making art based in Northern Ireland for a very long time, um, even though I grew up here, I've never actually made work directly linked to the Troubles or taken that subject head on and addressed it. Out of all the artists working in Northern Ireland, I never thought that I would be one that would be invited to represent that period of history or kind of show work which was in any way deemed a commentary on that political history, because it's not something that I ever directly referenced through the work. I never made or constructed images to deal with that subject matter. So I suppose the notion that my work is being singled out in that way is quite surprising to me. And always the particular works that get selected always surprise me because I never really myself have been able to see the link. And it almost takes somebody else to kind of point that out in a way for you to be able to see the potential of that kind of reading in the work. Because I hadn't directly referenced that subject within the work and people were reading that into the work, because that was a surprise to me at the time, I did feel a little bit like a phony. And then I started to think about what people were saying, and then I started to think about my own history and my own experience of Northern Ireland. And I don't talk about it a lot because it just sounds so sentimental and almost as if you're taking a really traumatizing subject and you're looking at it nostalgically. And that makes me very uncomfortable. But so I don't often tell people that my own experience of the Troubles has probably affected me more than I realise, growing up through that year after year after year. And I think that what you do is you suppress that kind of experience. I don't know how honest to be, but I suppose I should maybe say that my first childhood memory is actually a bomb blast, because I grew up, my father owned a bar and we lived above the bar. And my very first memory is of glass blown in round me because a shop opposite had been blown up. And we eventually had to move from living above the bar because we were bombed so much. So the whole time that I was growing up and even going to art college, it seemed like in Belfast, tit for tat killings, a young man was being shot on some street every single night. And there was a sense of kind of urgency about it but you kind of, being searched, going into shops by the army and things like that, you kind of suppressed it. Well, at the time you didn't know you were suppressing it. At the time you just dealt with it. It was your normality and you just got used to it. But it wasn't until some years later that I realised what you had kind of come through, because I remember, I think it was around 2007, I went to a Belfast Film Festival screening of Robin Wiley's film In the Name of God. And I think that film was made around 1972. And it wasn't the usual kind of depiction of Belfast or the Troubles. It was quite experimental. The soundtrack, the electronic soundtrack, was very experimental, with snatches of overheard conversations coming and going. And there was a real sense of chaos within the film. It was more like a kind of a film collage of all of the things that I suddenly remembered. And even though it was 2007 and we were supposed to be in a period allegedly of, peace, I had this very strange experience where I was sitting in the film theatre and I just felt overwhelmed and I couldn't understand why. I didn't know whether I felt like I was going to be sick or I was going to cry or something. And I kept thinking, I'm going to have to get up and go out because I don't want to embarrass myself. Just trying to sit there and kind of contain it. But I just felt very kind of unsettled by the film. And it took something like that, which seemed so real and so visceral, that just the experiences of the way that he collaged the sound and the imagery together just kind of brought me back to all of the things that I had just thought were normal, even though they were absolutely diabolical things. You do, in order to live here every day and to go to school or to go to college or to go to work, you did just deal with it. So all of this came welling up to the surface, and then I kind of realised that somehow, I suppose, you can't live through that experience and you can't have that kind of experience, and for that not to come out in the work somehow. And I realised that perhaps what people were recognising in my work and wanting to kind of select it for those exhibitions, what they were picking up on in a more objective way was the ability to tap into a sense of something sinister or an atmosphere which had a sense of foreboding about it, or a sense of desolation. All of these things that I recognised and knew were in the work, but I didn't necessarily question why I was so drawn to that type of imagery, or to recreate that type of atmosphere. So I think that maybe started to connect for me, and I started to understand that maybe there was more of that in the work than I was aware of, and it was on an unconscious level that I was kind of filtering that into the work. But it wasn't. It was almost too deep for me to kind of recognise in a very upfront way. I remember making a whole series of photographs in institutional spaces, and one of the spaces that I selected was a corridor in a hospital, and there were a series of hospital beds lined up, and I went and photographed that. And to me, that was just an extension of the work that I was making around institutional space, and I was using furniture and objects within the space to kind of act as a stand-in for the figure or the human presence within the space. But when I exhibited that work as part of another series in, I think it was Amsterdam at the time, because the statement that they had adjacent to my work stated that I was born and worked in Northern Ireland, and because of the Omagh bombing, people automatically assumed that I had made that work in response to that. And in hindsight, they were kind of going back through history and picking out moments in Northern Irish history and kind of attaching it to the work. So all of those stories that you heard about Omagh, where there were so many bodies being taken in after the bomb, that they didn't have enough trolleys for them all, and they had to place some of them as respectfully as they could, lying on the floor or on sort of seats and things like that. Because of that, and I suppose the title as well, I think, which was an object which tells of loss. But I was thinking in a more general sense about loss and about human loss and about mortality and the kind of context of that sort of environment, and how it makes you feel just to even be there, that sense of anxiety. And I think that people connected the title and the imagery, and obviously because I was from Northern Ireland, they thought that I was making a direct reference to that. So it's interesting after the work to see how these meanings can unfold and people can interpret the work.